man named Joy. And I thought how wonderful Joe Burrow got the Heisman last night. Yes. That made everybody happy. That wasn't like an Ole Miss fan or something. Not around here. I want to talk about genealogy today. How many of you have been kind of into that recently? Anybody done the DNA testing? Okay. I've done that, and I was trying to remember as I was getting ready to spit in the tube. Is there any crimes that I've committed that I've forgotten about? That, evidence was left. They'll find me. Yeah, that was kind of interesting. I run down some cousins through Ancestry.com, but what I'm really thinking today is family stories. My dad's parents met in an unusual way. My grandfather was from eastern Missouri and southern Missouri. He was a miner, as we all are until we're 18, of course, but that was his life work, mining the lead mines, and that kind of played out. And sometime in the early 1900s, he went to Osage County, Oklahoma, and worked because, familiar with Oklahoma history, the Osage were one of the last tribes to get land in Oklahoma, and they had good lawyers. So they got the mineral rights. And so in the early 1900s, oil was found on Osage land, and there was a lot of rich Osage Native Americans because of that. So my grandfather was out working for a family in a little town called Fairfax, Oklahoma. This is kind of on the Arkansas River. He was in his mid-30s, and there was a woman who was from the same county in Missouri my grandmother was living in, called Western County, that was out in Oklahoma. She had married a man from there. And so she met my grandfather, and she thought, he and Effie, my grandmother, back in Western County, they might make a good match, because Effie was in her early 30s and, kind of getting in that spinster age, so they were kind of worried about her and getting her married off. So she was back in Western County and said, I met this man out there, and I think that you should like him. And so they carried on a correspondence for a period of time. And they agreed that they would meet, and if they would stand each other's looks, that they would get married. So he came by train to Marshfield, Missouri, which is the county seat, and they each had a rose and a lapel so they could find each other. And they met on the town square, and they talked a while, and I guess they could stand each other's looks, and they got their marriage license. And then my grandmother's family, there was some Methodist ministers in that family, and I think her brother was a Methodist minister and actually performed the service, and he said these marvelous words. He said, "You picked a great time of year to get married because there weren't too many flies." Brandon, that's a good choice for you. So they went back on the train to Fairfax, Oklahoma, and he bought a wagon and a team of oxen, and they came back to Webster County and bought a little farm and had 40 acres of rocks, and almost starved to death. But that's just some family lore that I'm glad to pass on. We all have family stories. hidden in that little genealogy song are some amazing things. The oral tradition was how genealogy was done for a long time. And it's not just, fuzzy memories. People gave their lives to be able to remember exact details about things. Yeah. So that's how genealogy was done. But basically dealt with the male side. And most of the genealogies in the Bible do. But Matthew writes this genealogy of Jesus, 14 generations from Abraham to David, and 14 generations from David to the exile, and 14 generations from the exile to Joseph. And he lifts up the names of 4 women. The first woman that he mentions was Tamar. Her story is found in Genesis chapter 38. And I'm not making this up. It's in there. She married a son of Jacob. His name was which is a great name, And people are having a conversation, and he keeps thinking, what? Are they calling my name every time they pause? Anyway, he was deemed wicked according to God, and it says God killed him. And the custom was that the older brother was the important one in the family, so if the older brother died, then if there's a younger brother, he needs to take the older brother's place in the family and marry the widow. So Onan was next in line, and God didn't like him either, so he killed him, and so that left Tamar on her own. And there was a younger brother, but at this point, Jacob is kind of down on Tamar and kind of the black widow idea. And so just go back to your home with your father, and we'll wait till the younger boy gets older. So she goes back, and she lives in the tents of her father, kind of a poor existence, and she wears her widow's clothes and all that. Jacob's wife, no, that's not Jacob. Sorry, Judah. Judah is, yes, I'm sorry. Judah, brother of David. So Judah's wife died, and after a while, Tamar heard that Judah was going to go to check on the shearing of sheep, which was a ways away. And so she went ahead of him, and she got herself made up, and she wore a veil over her face, and she camped by the side of the road. And Judah came along, and he saw this was a woman that was for sale. And so they had a negotiation, and he was going to give her a kid from the flock sometime later. And she said, no, cash only. And so he gave her his signet ring, and he gave her his belt and a staff. So goes on his way. She goes back to her father's house, and Judah, who is kind of head of this tribe, hears a few months later that Tamar is pregnant. And this is a no-no. So he arranges for her to be brought before him, and she is going to be sentenced to death by burning. She does this little sleight of hand thing and shows up with his signet ring, his staff, and his belt, and says, these belong to the man that made me pregnant. And Judah says, uh-oh. So he allows her to live and becomes part of his family again. And there are 2 sons born. And one of those sons' names was Perez, who is an ancestor of Jesus. Okay. First one. Second woman, we jump ahead 7 generations after the captivity in Egypt, where Charlton Heston comes and leads the people out into the desert and gets the 10 Commandments and all that. Moses has died, and the people of Israel have been wandering in the wilderness and are getting ready to invade Canaan, the Promised Land. I call it invasion because, people have already lived there. It wasn't just open. So they're going to have to fight for this territory. And they sent spies ahead and into this town of Jericho, and you know the story in the song about that. Well, the people of Jericho recognized that there was an army coming, and they were suspicious about any strangers in town, and so they found out that there were some spies in the community, and so they began to search everywhere, and Rahab, who was a woman of ill repute, arranged for these spies to hide on her roof, and she'd cover them up with bulrushes or cane or something like that. And they were allowed to escape later, but she said, when you come and invade our town, spare my family. And they agreed, and she was spared, and she is called a mother of Israel. For we just jump ahead 1 generation, because her son was Boaz, to the story of Ruth. And women tend to be more familiar with the story of Ruth than most of these stories. Am I right? Okay. So we know that Ruth was a foreigner in Israel. She had married, her husband had died, she was childless. Her mother-in-law also was a widow without other children now. And they were kind of on their own, which wasn't a good thing for women in those days. So her mother-in-law was Naomi, and Naomi said, I want to go back to my own people in Bethlehem. Well, Ruth was a Moabite, which was a foreigner, and she said, let me go with you. And Naomi says, no, go home to your people and all that. And Ruth clung to Naomi and said, I insist. So they both go to Bethlehem, and they're existing, and Boaz is a wealthy landowner, and he kind of notices Ruth, and he allows her to glean in his fields, which, after the harvest, there's some left, and poor people would be allowed to come in and get what they could. And so Ruth and Naomi are gathering in the fields, and Naomi is aware that Boaz kind of has his eye on Ruth, so she suggests, after the men work all day and with the harvest, and then they go in and they have food and drink, and then they lay down in the harvest room there, why don't you just go in and kind of curl up at Boaz's feet? And so apparently that worked pretty well, and Ruth and Boaz were a couple, and he chose her and made quite a statement about that he would make her a kinswoman, and they had a baby that was Obed on that list. 3 generations later, we read about the wife of Uriah the Hittite. So, the country's at war. David is king. He is home in his palace. The army is out fighting, and he happens to be up on the roof one day, and he notices there is a woman that was bathing on a roof that he can see, and he thought she was quite beautiful, and so he said to his servants, bring that woman to me. And, the king gets what he wants. As Bruce said, it's good to be a king. Nice story. And Bathsheba ends up pregnant, but her husband's off at war. So David says, well, let's bring Uriah home for a furlough. But Uriah is a dedicated soldier. And he said, I'm not going to spend time with my wife while my soldiers are out there in the field fighting. And so David reluctantly sends him back into the field. to fight, and then engineer so that the people that are fighting with Uriah will pull back and leave him vulnerable by himself, and he ends up dead. And so David now can marry Bathsheba because she's a widow. And the son that they have is, unfortunately, a child that didn't live. And it was quite a scandal. And people knew that David had done wrong with this. But they did have another son, and his name was Solomon. And Bathsheba obviously schooled him to be a good leader, and he became the greatest king of the time of Israel. So we have talked about 4 women. And I got to ask, why did Matthew choose to write about the genealogy of Jesus, which is normally done just with the dates? And he wrote about 4 women, all of whom had really messy situations. You know, it wasn't just a simple life that they had. They had problems. They had creative solutions using whatever tools they had. Why? I wonder he did that. I wonder how much Jesus knew about his family history. And I wonder how much he knew about who these women were and what they meant to Israel. Matthew was not the first gospel. Mark was the first gospel, and that was written 20, 30 years after the writings of Paul in the New Testament. But Matthew was the first to write about the miraculous birth of Jesus. And it's a story that, unlike Luke, which is all about Mary and her family, Matthew is about Joseph and his struggle when his girlfriend shows up pregnant. What should he do? So, you know, we have a great set of stories here, and we live in a time of great change, don't we? I mean, cell phones, internet, new ways of communicating have driven us crazy, but also really changed our lives. You know, I get this thing once a week about how many hours of screen time I've had on my phone, and it's scary. What did I do with that time before? So we recognize that life has changed. A couple of years ago, Time magazine made that the person of the year was the silence breakers, the women who were coming out and speaking about sexual harassment. We have some issues with that in 3 of these stories of the ancestors of Jesus. I wonder if these stories that Jesus had in his family informed his view of women, because he was always including them, and he was sensitive to the needs of those who were kind of down and out and pushed to the fringes. And you know, here he can look on his family stories, and there are people that are, you know, good and bad in those folks. But there are certainly these people that have fought for justice and survival and made things come out right. I think maybe it might have been why he was so inclusive of women, and how he was not afraid of situations when life is messy, that God can step in and it's okay. And I kind of like this sermon. It kind of brings me joy to talk about these situations. And to know that God is full of possibilities, no matter how complicated or messy or messed up our lives can be. Well, it's all about Jesus. And we have a table that is intended to let us touch and taste His presence. It's all about Jesus, what He said and what He did, and our ability to remember that when we come close to Him,